Laura looked at her reflection in the mirror and barely recognized the woman before her. She was dressed elegantly for her husband's company party, but her eyes were dim, as if the spark of life had faded. It was a night that, for others, promised glamour and joy, but for her, it just meant another theater in her life of appearances. The reality was different. She was trapped in a marriage where love had long since given way to control and humiliation, and Carlos, her husband, was the guardian of her prison. Beside Carlos, Laura walked through the party, forcing a smile as he introduced her with his usual coolness. She observed the interaction around her, noticing the naturalness and pleasure of the other couples, something she hadn't felt in a long time. When she decided to go to the bar, she felt a look on her. A tall man with a calm expression stared at her. Laura couldn't help but shiver, and he approached her with unexpected gentleness. "You look tired," he said, in a tone that mixed kindness and concern. Miguel was the opposite of everything Carlos represented. Instead of intimidation, he conveyed calm and a gentleness that made her feel comfortable. Within a few minutes of conversation, Laura already found herself captivated by the sincerity of the unknown man, who seemed to see her beyond what she showed on the outside. Miguel didn't know anything about her, but he had managed to notice the sadness in her eyes, something that no one else seemed to notice. For Laura, that meeting awakened a feeling that had long been dormant, a mixture of hope and fear. The conversation continued briefly, but it left a deep mark on Laura. She found herself thinking about what it would be like to be next to someone like Miguel. She felt guilty at the mere thought, but at the same time, she couldn't help it. Carlos, who was observing everything from afar, approached to end the conversation in a harsh manner, making her feel the weight of her position and the life in which she was trapped. Laura said goodbye to Miguel with a discreet look, but full of meaning, as if at that moment something new was being born inside her. In the days that followed, Miguel's words and kindness seemed to echo in his mind. That feeling was both terrifying and invigorating, a reminder that there was more to the world than the oppressive routine I was subjected to. At home, Carlos remained indifferent, treating her with the same rigidity and coldness. He didn't love her, she knew that. But his presence was a constant reminder that any attempt to escape or change his life would have serious consequences. Miguel's image, however, became increasingly difficult to ignore. It was as if he had turned on a light in the darkness in which he lived. Despite the fear she felt, Laura began to realize that, within her, there was a force that she herself was unaware of. She didn't know what she would do with this feeling, but it was there, like a planted seed, waiting to blossom. And it was there that the first spark of the desire for freedom began to emerge, even if it was still just a shadow of courage. Laura began to observe Carlos with different eyes, questioning how he had endured that domineering and insensitive behavior for so long. That life, which before seemed like an immutable destiny, now seemed like a prison that she no longer wanted to accept. And although Miguel was just a fleeting memory, he represented the possibility of something beyond that colorless existence. Laura didn't have to wait long for Carlos's coldness to reappear in an even more cruel form. He started asking questions about the night at the party, trying to extract information, although his rigid expression revealed that he didn't care about the answers. When she strayed, Carlos would stop her with an intimidating look, making her feel trapped in her own home. His words were cutting, and he questioned everything, from the time he spent at the bar to why it took so long for you to return to his side. With each of Carlos' sentences, Laura retreated more, aware that any explanation could be interpreted as a failure. He kept her isolated, canceling any contact with old friends and even with her own family, who found her distant and cold, without imagining the reality she was living. Carlos's control was complete, and he seemed to take pleasure in reminding Laura of this at every opportunity, making her feel that any deviation from the routine would be punished. Laura wondered how long she would be able to endure that hardship without losing her own sanity. Laura's thoughts, however, increasingly returned to her brief encounter with Miguel. She found herself remembering every detail of the conversation, the calm he conveyed to her, and how, at least for a few minutes, she felt alive. When one day, she received an unexpected message from Miguel, she was taken by surprise. He asked if everything was okay, without insisting or demanding an answer. The touch of kindness and consideration expressed in that simple message were enough to make her feel the urgency to vent. On impulse, Laura responded, thanking her for her concern and disclosing, in a restrained way, that she was facing difficult times. She knew she was taking a dangerous step, but the need to be heard was stronger than the fear. In the days that followed, they exchanged messages that, for Laura, were like an escape valve. Miguel listened to her without judgment, offering words of support that made her feel valued, something she hadn't experienced in a long time. Throughout their conversations, Laura began to open up more, sharing the anguish of being trapped in a relationship that consumed her. She didn't mention specific details, but Miguel seemed to understand enough to know that she was in a painful situation. He encouraged her, suggesting that she look for ways to reconnect with her inner strength, even though for Laura, the idea of escaping seemed like a distant illusion. She was scared, but Miguel was now a point of hope in her dark life. Carlos, however, became more vigilant, perhaps feeling that Laura was escaping his control. He watched her closely, looking for signs of disobedience, and her every word or action seemed to motivate him to be more incisive in his oppression. Laura found herself increasingly pressured, suffocated by Carlos' constant and oppressive presence. At times, she wondered if she could hide her feelings much longer without him suspecting something. Despite this, Miguel was a constant reminder that there was something more. The messages exchanged with him became a relief, a small window to the outside world, where she could express her feelings. Laura knew she was approaching a dangerous line, but she also understood that this connection with Miguel was what kept her strength. Laura's days continued to be suffocating, but Miguel's invisible presence gave her unexpected encouragement. Exchanging messages became a sacred moment in his routine, the only moment in which he felt some freedom. He was kind, patient, and never pressured her. Miguel was just there, available to listen, allowing her to vent without fear of judgment. Little by little, the connection they had began to intensify, and Laura noticed that her heart beat stronger with each new message. While Carlos continued his relentless control, Laura harbored a new and forbidden feeling. She felt guilty, as if she were betraying the life she chose to build. But at the same time, Miguel's idea represented a freedom she had never experienced. He was the symbol of a different life, one that knew no shackles of fear. With each conversation, Laura realized how much she longed for something she never had. She was trapped, but now she knew what she wanted: freedom and perhaps love. One night, after a severe argument with Carlos, Laura went out for a brief night walk, without even telling him. She felt the need to escape, even if for a few minutes, the oppressive weight of his presence in her life. Miguel sent a message, noting his absence online that night, and Laura decided to share what she was going through. Between careful words and restrained honesty, she revealed the intensity of her pain. Miguel responded with understanding, but Laura knew he was worried. During the conversation, something unexpected happened. Miguel suggested they meet in person. "We can talk in a safe place, just so you can have a moment out of the situation," he said, cautiously, as if he was afraid of crossing a line. Laura hesitated, feeling guilt mixing with the desire to see him. She knew that by accepting it could make her life even more complicated, but the prospect of seeing him in person was irresistible. It was his chance to experience a moment of true freedom. With her heart racing, Laura agreed to meet him. They arranged the meeting for a discreet location, away from Carlos' surveillance. When he arrived at the agreed location, he found Miguel already waiting, with a kind and welcoming smile. He was even more serene in person, and his presence brought a tranquility that made her take a deep breath, as if he was releasing years of accumulated tension. Without needing to say anything, he hugged her, a simple gesture, but one that meant much more than he could imagine. In Miguel's arms, Laura felt a peace she never knew before. He knew that meeting was the beginning of something dangerous, something that could cost him a lot, but he also understood that he needed to follow his feelings. She felt alive, as if, for the first time in years, she had the right to exist outside of the rules that Carlos imposed. And when he looked at Miguel, he realized that he wanted to take a risk. He made her promise to be careful, not to rush, but Laura already knew she couldn't go back. Something inside her was awake, and there was no way she could fall asleep again. After that meeting, Laura returned home, but she was not the same. The experience of freedom, however small it was, ignited his will to fight. Carlos noticed a change in her behavior, although he didn't know exactly what motivated it. Laura, however, remained firm, without revealing anything. What was once just dissatisfaction now turned into determination. She didn't know how, but she would find a way to get out of that prison, even if it meant risking everything. After that night, Laura felt torn between two realities: the oppression of marriage and the secret freedom of being with Miguel. Their exchange of messages intensified, and meetings became more frequent. In every moment with Miguel, Laura experienced what she had been missing for a long time: the lightness of being heard, desired, and above all, understood. "I was aware of the risk, but the feeling of being alive was a price I was willing to pay. As Laura allowed herself to feel this new awakening, Carlos began to notice changes in her posture. The confidence she tried to demonstrate to herself came through in small details. She didn't back down so easily. She began to challenge his authority with silent gestures, like going for a walk without asking permission or avoiding incisive questions about her day. Carlos, suspicious, began to observe her every move, seeing it as a challenge. He wouldn't let her get away, and Laura knew she needed to act with extreme caution. Despite her growing fear, Laura felt more and more involved with Miguel. He encouraged her to believe in herself, and little by little she felt stronger and more confident to face the choices she would need to make. In one of their meetings, Miguel suggested that she start creating a plan to leave the marriage, offering her the support she needed to make her feel safe. The proposal scared and excited her in equal measure, as it was the first time she saw a real chance of escaping. The desire for freedom, which before was just a dream, began to seem like a possibility. However, one slip almost ruined everything. One afternoon, Laura left her cell phone on the table while she went to the kitchen, and a message from Miguel appeared on the screen, visible enough for Carlos to read it at a glance. He didn't confront Laura right away, but his gaze darkened, and she knew something had changed. The tension at home became palpable, as if an invisible precipice had appeared between the two. Carlos began monitoring Laura more rigorously, questioning her every time she went out, calling unexpectedly to check where she was and making disconcerting insinuations. Laura felt the weight of control increase, and fear became a constant companion. She realized that any false step could lead to an irreversible situation. He then decided to talk to Miguel about Carlos' distrust. They agreed to communicate with more discretion, and Miguel reinforced the idea that she should prepare, little by little, to leave that life without arousing suspicion. Laura knew she needed to keep up appearances, but the psychological pressure of living in Carlos' shadow was suffocating. On a particularly tense night, Carlos decided to confront her, insinuating that he knew something. "Are you hiding something from me, Laura?" he asked with a threatening tone as he stared at her intently. Laura, trying to hide her panic, coldly denied it, refusing to give him any satisfaction. She felt her heart speed up and her breathing hitch, but she stood firm, meeting his gaze without blinking. This was a silent battle, and Laura knew that her every reaction could reveal too much. When she returned to her room, Laura felt her body collapse in a mix of fear and exhaustion. The walls Carlos had built around her were closing in tighter and tighter, and now, with his open distrust, Laura knew time was running out. She could no longer delay her decision, because Carlos, in his obsession with control, would not rest until he revealed her secret. The weeks that followed the confrontation were even more intense for Laura. Carlos became a watchful shadow, increasingly controlling and insistent. She felt that at any moment he could discover everything, and the idea of losing sight of him to escape seemed more and more distant. But Laura knew she couldn't back down now. Miguel continued to be the pillar that gave him strength, and, even though the meetings had become rare and brief, each one of them was enough to rekindle hope. One afternoon, while alone in a cafe, Laura received a call from Miguel. His soft voice reassured her, but he was worried. He knew that time was working against them and suggested something that took Laura by surprise: that they run away together, before Carlos had the chance to discover the truth. The proposal was risky and bold, and Laura, at first, hesitated. Running away meant definitively breaking with the past and taking a risk on a new and uncertain life.